Hello, folks. Welcome to the Reason RX podcast. This is your co-host, Michael, writer of Zero Books, author of Zero Books, author of Zero World Tours, author of Zero Symphonies, producer of No Major Lectures, but I'm published on my own blog. I'm self-published. And my co-host, Melanie, author of how many books?
Well, zero.
Zero books. Writer of how many world-class published articles?
Well, zero. But
Zero.
I have started my own piano series, so I guess I forgot to mention that.
Oh.
But,
How many symphonies have you written? How many operas?
Yeah, I can't say that I've. Yeah, no.
Scott, how many books have you written?
A half.
How many world tours?
None.
There's your authority for you, folks. All right. So, today we're talking, of course, with Scott Harris, as you could hear. And we'll be talking about some physical science stuff, the nature of it. And this is something we all need to learn. Important for parents so they can help out their kids. Or if they're homeschool parents, they can have some input into like how the kids are taught, try to make things better. Of course, teachers need to know this to make the world a better place. That's what it's about. A lot of us have the heart in the right place. It's just figuring out good methods and the philosophy that a lot of us need help with. So this will be important in that respect, given some really good fundamental ideas that teachers can use to make science education better, help their students out, make the culture better, know that when the students leave the classroom, they're going to live a much better life. Then, when the teacher learns it makes them better. Of course, business professionals, people in general, all need to know how to engage in scientific thinking, because, basically scientific thinking is systematized study of cause-effect relationships in some area, and we need to know that in some chemistry, some physics, some astronomy and things, so we can achieve our values, because this physical world is the place where we achieve our values, where we get things, eat, sleep, have friends. We need to know how to move around in it efficiently instead of making a bunch of mistakes and wasting time, getting hurt, getting injured, being frustrated. Later we can get into sciences like social sciences and psychology and stuff like that. But science is an important thing, and then it's important to know the methods in them to help us think better, to know when something's true or false. What do y'all think, guys?
It's great. Well said.
Maybe we should write a book one day, but that's one thing about some stuff. It's like there's so much to say, it's hard to and you're learning new things all the time. It's easier to do that than stop and write things down in a book that you already know. But it's important. Helps you understand things better. But anything else y'all want to add?
Let's talk about science.
Okay, let's do it. What do you have to say, Scott?
Start with the definition from our favorite biologist, E.O. Wilson.
Who we talked about earlier, and I wish people could have heard the 15-minute conversation that I didn't record. We had a great conversation for 15 minutes, and why does it get screwed up? Because Mr. Writer of Zero Books doesn't record it. Crap.
Wilson defines science as the systematic enterprise of gathering knowledge about the world and organizing and condensing that knowledge into testable laws and theories. So if we pull out the key words, science is the systematic gathering and condensing of knowledge into testable theories.
As opposed to some of the myths about rain dances? That's a good example that I just thought of. Inside joke, people, sorry.
That's a great shorthand definition that a kid can almost carry around in their head, because we want a systematic way of thinking instead of a haphazard, random way of thinking. And that's one example I use as a rain dance, that if a tribal person is doing a rain dance, does it actually make it rain, and how do you know? And so the kids, we start having this conversation, and they quickly agree that it's not making the rain happen. Well, how do you know that? Well, somebody brings up meteorology and talks about cloud formations, and that's what it takes to get it to rain. And that nobody can seem to explain the causal mechanism of the shaman doing the dance and the rain then happening. So we then start talking about why would they do the dance then, because probably they knew it wasn't making it rain. And it provides social cohesion for the tribe, and it gives them some hope. It gives them some tribal discipline, because we can't make the gods angry. And those things served real human needs. So they're not to be dismissed and laughed at. Perhaps we recognize that it didn't really make it rain, but that those things served needs for human nature.
That's one thing biology's learning more about, how to look at things from a evolutionary perspective. But do you got a problem with your ears, Melanie?
Just couldn't hear you for a little bit.
Yeah, because I accidentally put my microphone in mute because I'm a genius. Now it's working, as you can tell. Yeah. And there's different theories of science, since you mentioned the myth thing. Who is it you said looked at science as...
Karl Popper has a quote that says, "Science must begin with myths and the criticism of myths."
Yeah. And so that's one thing to consider, people, if that's the case. But we got to be scientific in it, not just start with what someone says, but think of how could a science have really started? Is that it? Maybe it was. But ask, what are some other ways? You know, one common thing you'll hear is that science started with agriculture. One thing we've talked about on the podcast before is some people's idea that science started from tracking animals and hunting. I haven't read this guy's book yet, but read a little bit, and that seems to make sense and seems to have a good argument. But
hunting and planting both are using logic in a systematic way. What's the best way to capture this animal? How can we get this wheat to grow? And you think it's not that hard to figure out how to make wheat grow, but you go all the way up to the 1960s with in China under Mao's rule, they were doing all kinds of things wrong, planting the seeds way too deep in rows too far apart. And when Western experts tried to give them help and no, this is how we grow wheat here, that knowledge has been around for 10,000 years. It's certainly been modified, but they instead of using a systematic and methodical scientific approach, there was a lot of politics involved with how things were going to be done. So then we've got to figure out a theory. And I have a definition here of a theory: a set of interrelated constructs and propositions that specify relations among variables to explain and predict phenomena. So again, if we boil that down, it's related constructs that explain and predict. So now we can start looking at which fertilizer was the best for this wheat field. We seem to be getting better yields using fish blood or whatever compared to cow dung.
And if someone thinks it's easy to grow wheat, then they need to be given 5,000 seeds of 300 different species and be put out in the woods somewhere, and they can pick out which ones are wheat, and they can try to grow them and show us how easy it is. Yeah, super easy. Which ones are daisies, which ones are tomatoes, which ones are wheat.
And this knowledge, of course, in a hunter-gatherer society is going to be handed down through oral tradition. And then as we get writing, of course, we're going to get a little better with the methodologies.
Could you repeat the definitions of science and theory that you said? Repeat them a little slower.
Yeah, Wilson said science is the systematic enterprise of gathering knowledge about the world and organizing and condensing that knowledge into testable laws and theories. So I condense that as science is the systematic gathering and condensing of knowledge into testable theories.
Yeah, and I say kind of more simply, science is a systematic study of cause-effect relationships.
And that's one thing science is always trying to get at is the theoretical underpinning, or what is the mechanism by which that thing happens. Yeah. Well, with wheat, you need a certain amount of fertilizer, you need a certain amount of water, etc. With the rain dance, you need to do that dance right before those clouds form, because certain cloud formations are necessary for rain to accumulate.
Yeah, and that'd be the part that the shaman or whoever, whatever it be called in a society, would probably keep more secret to himself, so the other people thought he or she was actually making it rain. Had to have some success, as you said.
Right. And so that knowledge, of course, anybody in a hunter-gatherer society is going to have a certain amount of knowledge just by living in nature. But yes, shaman might have that injury or the bone that as the barometric pressure drop starts aching, clue them in that a change in weather is coming.
Yeah, and then people back then were a lot smarter than people nowadays think. If I was stuck on a desert island somewhere, I'd much rather have some primitive, so-called 10-year-old from like 10,000 years ago than I would pretty much any like 15 or 20-year-old nowadays in America. You know, because they'd be much more in tune with nature and have learned how things work and would know about animals and a little bit about cooking and how to hunt and what plants you can eat and what plants you can't, and a little bit about medicinal plants.
But they wouldn't show you how to play Minecraft, though. They wouldn't be able to show you how to play the latest video game.
But that'd only be if we were lucky enough to be on a desert island that had electricity in Minecraft. And then what was the definition of theory you had?
Interrelated constructs and propositions that specify relations among variables to explain and predict phenomenon. And by specify relations among variables, again, we're talking about the mechanism by which something happens. And that's, Penn Jillette, the magician, has a quote in which he says, speaking of Western science, he says, "I'm sorry, we cured polio. What more do you want? Your herbalism has done jack. We cured polio. And guess what? It cures polio even if you don't believe in it." And that's one way you know something is science, is you don't need to believe in it for it to work. Right? So penicillin will cure something whether or not you believe in Western science and penicillin.
Yeah. And then remember, folks, we're talking about physical science here. There'd be a broader concept of theory to encompass some other areas, because not all sciences are mathematical. Things can still be a science but not be mathematical. That's a big fallacy you'll hear nowadays. It's like it's got to be mathematical to be a science, but that's like nonsense.
One phrase we use in economics, and I think this came from Alfred Marshall, he's the economist who came up with the graphs, supply and demand. He said that, I could be paraphrasing here, that mathematics is an engine of analysis. It's a tool for analysis, and he said after you do it, you should throw the math away because it's just the tool. And we sometimes see bad economics in which economists fall in love with the model and keep trying to make a reality fit the model.
Yeah, comes up in a lot of things.
And yeah, that famous line, I have his name somewhere, the map is not the territory. Right? The map is the map. It's a representation of reality.
Just like Ptolemy suffered from some of the same things because of the Platonism. The math is the real. It doesn't fit appearances exactly, but, that's the nature of material. It doesn't conform to ideas as it should and obey and do what it's supposed to. There was that mistaken idea that rationalized the bad, more fundamental idea. But yeah.
And probably in another podcast, we can talk about the difference between the hard and so-called soft sciences. But a lot of the social sciences suffer from physics envy, in which they love that hard mathematical quantification that you can get in chemistry and physics. But economics isn't quite that hard. There's a bit of art to it as well, and certainly psychology, there's a lot of art to it, and not just the hard quantification.
Yeah. Science of philosophy. Right. So yeah, those are some important concepts that kids need to get. And then, like the way when we were talking earlier, and the part I didn't record, it was good talking about, listening at how you'd analyze the rain dance thing with the kids, get them to focus on actual facts and what they knew. And that's general idea is a better way to learn science instead of pretending that physics and chemistry are just areas where we can practice more math problems. It seems to be done too much like that. And, some of that, not to knock it entirely, because when people do some careers in physics or chemistry, they need some of that training. That is important. However, when that's the way all physics is done for everyone, that is wrong. That hurts not only people in general, but also the people who become scientists, because then they have an improper idea of what science really is. You've got these formative years in elementary school, junior high school. You're doing the same Platonic stuff over and over again. How many people stop and look back and question that? Mm-hmm. How many people think of questioning it? Never mind finding out the right answers. As I say, I sure the hell wouldn't have on my own. It was only because of the reading I did. Learning a lot, stumbling upon a history of physics book, getting into some things like that more, learning from other people why it's important to study that history.
I'll give you an example of this, and this is from maybe 20 years ago, in which two researchers at the University of Oxford looked at Olympic marathon times, the male times over all of history and the female times, and looked at the rate at which the times were getting faster. Now, women came into the game later, so the slope was a little bit steeper. They were getting better faster from where they started. And they then said, if this rate continues, women will outrun men by year 2028 or whatever. I don't know how anybody with a PhD could come up with that and print that. Further, the school I was at the time, the science department head sent that article out. We had a day in which we were doing standardized testing, and then we had to have something to do for the freshman science kids, and that was the article that was provided. Now, where to even begin with what's wrong on that scientifically? So, first of all, trends never continue. That's why they're called trends. But secondly, that's just looking at the math and disconnecting it from logic, from the historical context of why men and women were getting faster at different rates.
And causality. That's why I always like to bring that in. It's important. I don't give a damn what anybody says about anything. I don't give a damn if it's 99% scientists agree the earth is flat or the earth goes around the sun. I don't give a damn. What are the facts? That's what students should learn, not what the majority thinks about something. I don't care what it is. Martians, you have a red nose, global warming, no global warming, fossil fuels, women this, men that, the sun this, the earth that, the moon. I don't care. What are the facts? That's what they need to know, the facts and how to reason from them.
Well, I had a junior varsity swimmer who at his first meet dropped something like 6 seconds on his best time. At his second meet, another 4 seconds. And he starts asking me what the state record is. And I'm thinking, oh, you're ambitious. I said, why is that? He goes, well, at the rate I'm dropping time, I'll be able to break the state record. And, I mean, the state record is pretty close to Olympic trials. So,
wow, yeah.
So the point with both of these stories is that curves always level off. That gains, whether they be in swimming, running, learning to read, they happen very quickly by leaps and bounds. And then as you get better at something, the gains get much harder to get. And this is why curves level off and trends don't continue. And they're probably, with a pretty good certainty, not going to catch the men.
Then
For
another,
physiological reasons.
what? Another good example of that generalizes what we're saying to looking at causality in general and not just the math or the stats. I heard it today on listening to an episode of STEM Talk. Thanks, folks. STEM Talk. I love y'all guys. But it's a good podcast. And it was a Q&A, their most recent podcast. And some people were asking them questions. And they were talking, the two hosts were talking about an article someone had sent them, and it says that if a way to predict whether or not you're going to have a heart attack is if you can do 40 push-ups. If you can only do 10, then you're more likely to have a heart attack. But you got to look at, you have to know how to do science to some extent. You don't have to know everything, but you need to know that you have to have concrete things from which you draw conclusions, and there's a process of reasoning. Like, since that's not really taught in school, then people just go with the conclusion because they don't know how to form a conclusion, because who the hell ever learns the nature of concepts or the nature of propositions or the nature of conclusions and how to develop a long process of reasoning in physics. You know, a little bit's done in geometry, but it's never connected to anything. But so then these people dig into their research and they see that, well, the people who could do the 40 push-ups were like freaking 30 or 35, so they're younger. They have average. I think the average age of them was like 35. Their average BMI, body mass index, was like 28. And then the group that could only do 10, their average age was like 54, and their BMI is like 33. Well, of course you're going to have this difference. It has nothing to do with how many push-ups you can do. It is to do with like your overall condition. You know, so to have an article that has that title or to say that this proves it is ludicrous.
It's like the commercials for exercise equipment. They take attractive, really fit people and put them on it in the commercial, and you look at that and think, well, gee, I'm going to look like that.
Yeah.
Well, after 2 years of use, perhaps.
Yeah, and how did those people get to looking like that in the first place? It probably wasn't that little machine.
Right.
But, right, so there, you know, so the example I talked about wasn't some kind of trend like that. It was just quantifying certain groups. This group is like that one thing, and this group is like this other, and you can see that it's really a different factor or different factors coming into play. And then the way they did it, it seemed like they were talking about, I'd have listened again. Maybe I heard wrong, but I thought these people were saying that these people, they looked at what they already had. It wasn't saying, okay, you can do 40 push-ups, and now let's track them 5 or 10 years and see if they have a heart attack. It's like what their condition already was. It looked like heart attacks they already had. That's the way it sounded to me, which is even worse, you know? So, of course, if you've had a heart attack, you're less, or something like that, you're more likely to do less push-ups too. And so they're kind of getting it backwards. So they really should be, hey, everybody, if you have a heart attack, you're probably going to do a few push-ups. But I'd have to look at the study to see exactly what they were saying, but that's kind of the way it sounded. So I'm not sure for sure, but yeah, so you got to like get out and look at the facts and look at reality and what things are being investigated and what things are being said about them. What's the cause-effect relationships there, not just what are the numbers or what's the math. Very important. But we're getting on about 8:20. So I guess even though it's a short podcast, it would have been longer if I wouldn't have screwed up.
Well,
So,
I think that's a good introduction, and I think perhaps another one as we get into E.O. Wilson's 4 principles of science. So we're talking about having this methodical approach to thinking. Well, what is that, and how do we develop that?
mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can still say a bit more about theories and what they are, other definitions, different definitions of science, flesh out more what its nature is, physical science in particular, science in general. But
and then we can get into the difference of the social sciences.
Yeah, cool. And the aesthetic sciences. So, y'all have anything else to say, guys, before we sign off?
I think that's a wrap.
All right, cool. Sounds good. So, we hope there was a little tidbit or two in there for you, folks. As we say, we didn't get to go as long, dig into things as deep as we usually do and we like to, but that's my fault for being a doofus. But anyway, an important thing people learned is that we're authorities because we've written 0 books and 0 symphonies.
I'm just going to go write one real quick so that next time you ask.
Yes, and I've never been a guest on Good Morning America. So, never been invited. All right, so anyway, if anybody has any questions about science, shoot them to us, and we'll be talking more about this in the future. So thanks for listening. So bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.